Okay. So the pre-labs are due at the beginning of the lab. So you cannot do the pre-lab while you're in lab. It has to be done before that. And think of it as your ticket to be able to do the lab. You need a lab notebook, like I showed you beginning of class today. No spiral, no three-hole punch. It's got to be permanently bound. Now, this is the department standard. If you take Chem 300 or 305, they deviate from that standard by doing worksheets in the wet lab. This is going to be a full-blown write-up. Handwritten, pen. You can also do it digitally. You do it digitally, you still got to handwrite it. Some people like tablets, other people like paper. Leave one page in the beginning for a table of contents. Number each page because the table of contents goes by page number. And you're only going to be listing the first page that's in your notebook for that lab. Some people put all the pages down, all the parts, just the first page. All mistakes need to be readable. No whiteout, no scribbling, just a simple line through it. The OCD folks in here will love that. Very neat, but it's got to be readable. Now, in this class, we're going to be using a lot of chemicals that need to have first aid listed in your write-up. Okay, so these are the parts of the pre-lab. Title, purpose. Why are we doing this lab? Okay, there's always background material in the packet. And you get the purpose by reading the background. I'm not asking for a page of purpose. Like 2 sentences is fine. Okay, for each chemical used, we need to have a first aid specific for that chemical. You can find that on the SDS. I'll show you how to do that. The SDS stands for Safety Data Sheet. Used to be called MSDS. A good place to get them would be Flynn Science. But if you do Google, for example, okay, all SDS documents are PDF files, and they all form an international consistency. So section 4 is always first aid. Okay, so this is for copper sulfate, SDS. Down to section 4. First aid. Now, if you have lots of chemicals and they all have the same first aid, they have 8 chemicals and they all have the same first aid. Don't write 8 versions of it. write one version of it with 8 chemicals above it. Okay, I don't like busy work, and I don't think you do either. I want you to be safe. I want you to be exposed to the first aid, and except for water. I'm going to use water a little bit in here, not 100%. But you don't have to do the STS on water. You got to do it on basically everything else. Additionally, say we did it on this example, copper sulfate. Say in lab 6, we use copper sulfate again. You don't have to repeat the first aid. Just say C lab 1. Okay. Okay, so that's where to find the STS. Also in the lab, I have a big binder of them as well, printed off. You can use that as well. Okay, so let's go back to that. Okay, I give you a week on all labs, except for the when we synthesize aspirin. I give you 2 weeks for that because it's a multi-week lab. Okay, on the data table. The data table comes from the procedure where it says observe. You have a data table. Record, data table. And those keywords, make sure you have a place in your data table to record the results. Okay, so the lab's in 3 parts. Pre-lab. Oh yeah, sometimes there's pre-lab questions. Make sure you answer those. So there's pre-lab. There's the actual lab itself you do. Then there's post-lab. Post-lab, you're gonna have post-lab questions and not some calculations, a tiny bit, not very many. The aspirin lab is the only part where you have calculations. Okay, and that'll be due a week from Wednesdays. So if you're in Monday's lab, you have 2 extra days. Okay, we're not going to do any graphing. All right, so notice there are 2 signatures. Okay, the one on the right means you've done the pre-lab. If there's no TRF, you lose points and or you can't do the lab, which means you lose a lot of points. The one on the left is for cleanup. You cannot leave the lab without me making sure your area is clean. And we have this is a new building, only a couple years old. So the labs are pristine. Like up at Sierra, the paint on the ceiling is flaking off, all this stuff. And I still go through the same procedure there. The lab benches are clean. So that's the second signature. Okay, so here we have title, purpose. Notice it's not very long. Procedure. Think of this like a recipe. You may summarize the procedure. Here's another example. 2 signatures. You don't need your name. You can put it there if you'd like, but it doesn't need to be there. On the data table, any number has to have a unit associated with it. You can do that 1 or 2 ways. You can put the unit at the top here, or you can put it per the entry. Either way is fine.
What color ink What color ink pen do we need to use?
What color ink? Normally it's black or blue. But in my class, I like color. When you saw my lab coat, very colorful. I like color. So if you want to use red ink, that's fine. But normally they require blue or black. You also need a materials list. When you have an error, a simple line, correct it. I need to be able to read the error. Now, you're going to be using one side of the paper only. Notice how the ink here is bleeding through. When you pay 57 cents for a lab notebook, you get really thin paper. So sometimes the pen you're using will bleed through. So only write on one side of the paper, normally the right side only. The left side, in an emergency where you have no room and you need to insert something, you can write on the left side. But normally you don't write on the left side. You have plenty of room in your notebook. Okay, so any questions about the write-up? It's not hard. There are easy points and hard points. Labs are easy points, but you've got to do them though. Additionally, this is a lab class. If you flunk the lab, you flunk the class. I ran into this a lot up in Washington. They had this very active card group going on at the student center. And my students would rather play cards than do their lab. So this one person got all upset. He had an A-, we get minus and pluses up there, A- in lecture, and I gave him an F. He was all upset. I said, well, beginning of the semester, excuse me, I said, you got to pass the labs. You didn't pass the lab. Okay? Labs are not hard. They require work, but it's easy work. Okay? Any questions about the lab write-up? Now, I'd recommend decorating your lab coats in case you miss a wet lab. I'll give you 10 points if you decorate your lab coat. It's a fun thing to do anyway. But then if you miss a wet lab, you can use those 10 points from the lab coat to kind of pay for your wet lab. Okay? I'd recommend doing that over break. We're having a spring recess, so good time to do it then. Also your projects. Okay. Any questions on wet labs? So make sure your waivers turned in, your lab safety contracts turned in, and unit 1 is turned in by the 14th. The other 2 you have a week. So those should already be in. You cannot do this course without doing the waiver. You cannot do this course unless you sign the lab safety contract. Okay? All right, so we're going to get out early today.